Hi there. You asked for it in my DMs, wanting to know about the assistant coaches. So let's do it. Let's do a Carlton Witch Ramble about the current assistant coaches of the Carlton football team. Let's go. Let's start with Mr. Ashley Hansen. Okay, this is someone who, look, they're very driven, okay? Masculine energy, feminine energy, in that Aries kind of energy, very driven, very fiery, probably has a bit of a temper, okay? Does have a bit of a weird way of communicating, is a bit of a weirdo, all right? Like that Pisces Aquarius mix there and the Sun Mercury. That's a mind that is very good at thinking outside the box, okay? But it's maybe not great at communicating in a way that people expect. So probably has to work on the communication, very driven. And like, I don't know all the ins and outs of what each component of coaching is responsible for, but I can tell you that this is someone who works hard in order to get to where they need to go. That Mars Aries situation though, and that Sun Pisces, that can make you a little bit egotistical, right? That can make you someone who doesn't really like to change the way that you think, okay? Now, didn't really have a lot of emotional support in their upbringing, okay, and is kind of someone who does like to have a voice for people who maybe don't have a voice, okay, and that weird way of communicating probably comes in handy there, okay. Also pointing out that the placement here for guilt and shame feels a lot of guilt and shame about not working hard enough, right? Pisces men will always feel a version of that because they don't really exist in the physical world, right? There's this Pisces energy kind of it's very floaty kind of energy. So it's a more creative style of energy. Is helped out by the Mercury in Aquarius. That does give him quite a good mind, right? So as a senior assistant coach, I assume you have to be able to oversee all parts of coaching. And I think that actually with that Mercury in Aquarius, that Mars in Aries, this is someone who can be quite direct. Probably does question whether or not he's working hard enough quite a lot. And you know what? In that position, I think you fucking should. So all in all, I'm gonna say not a bad choice. Okay, not a bad choice. Okay, who's next? Next up, Mr. Aaron Hamill, backline coach. Okay, so I actually think this is the perfect energy for a backline coach. Okay. That Sun in Leo, a lot of confidence, right? A lot of ego, but also a lot of fun, right? Like that backline, pretty tough kind of energy. So it does require quite a masculine energy to be able to come forward and be able to kind of play in that masculine energy kind of playful space with the tough boys, right? So that Leo sun does give him a lot of confidence. It gives him a lot of like enjoyment, right? If he's enjoying the job, that's even better. Okay, now the Mercury Virgo situation, just like that Mercury Aquarius, it does provide a very good mind. Okay, this is someone who can put the pieces together, someone who collects information as well, someone who is very detail oriented when it comes to the way they communicate, right? Very good at using the right words and also noticing the details in what people are thinking and doing and how they're doing their job. Okay, Venus in Cancer gives him quite a nurturing quality to his relationships, like he would want to get to know people. And then a Mars in Gemini, fast to action, fast to move, fast to notice things about people. Again, making this a very curious kind of energy as well. So because we have this confidence in who he is as a person, okay, we also have this energy of searching for information and really being able to give and receive communication with noticing the details of what people are trying to communicate, as well as having this Mars and Gemini energy, which is, look, it brings this curiosity. It brings this idea of wanting to learn about how other people do things in order to then offer a solution. Okay. So likely had very driven father energies around him as a child, which helps with the confident energy here. And yeah, has like an incredible ability to expand and grow and take risks on things from that place of kind of intuitively understanding the balance across stuff. All right. Now, his future is going to be involved with relationships with people. And he has had to overcome the way that he communicates, probably been made to feel, quite misunderstood, or maybe even made to feel guilt or shame in the way that he's communicated in the past. Because sometimes that Leo energy can bring that little bit of ego, but with that Mercury Virgo, it's more likely that the communication that he's had has seemed quite critical, when in actual fact, the purpose of it is to make somebody better. So I think actually as a backline coach, this is kind of the perfect energy for it. All right. Now, it does have a wounding again around, whether or not he's allowed to have the reward for working hard. And so both of them so far, so Ashley and Aaron, both have that same kind of placement, and which is interesting because that's somewhat related to the Carlton team. So that's a whole other ramble. But as somebody who would be dealing with kind of the tougher, more masculine of the group, I think this is actually a really great energy for that. Okay. Up next, who have we got? Tim Clark. All right, Tim. An Aries. Okay, this is a fiery person. Okay, this one you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of, okay, because that ego in Aries, that Mercury in Aries, so the way that they communicate, right, it gives this energy of like being very sure, right? Being very sure of expressing their own opinions on things, right? And again, that Aries energy is the overall energy of the AFL. So there is something within that space. Now, builds relationships authentically based on the person he's in a relationship with. Okay, so there is a bit of a weirdness kind of energy to that. Probably does feel a bit weird in relationships with people, which would absolutely impact the ability to communicate with them, because there is that kind of ego-based, almost immature quality to the communication sometimes that would come across as like, we're doing it this way. We're doing it this way. Okay. Now, this Mars in Libra also very fucking interesting here, because Mars in Libra, it's the energy of like not wanting to start a fight, but very happily ending a fight. And this is the kind of person who probably doesn't speak up about things that annoy him until they actually poke him and affect him, and then he fires up. And the problem with that kind of communication is a lot of the players that he is dealing with are players that would not hear that type of communication. All right. They would be players that kind of shut down, and most people do that. If you're going to come firing at somebody after not having explained your way of thinking, then you are going to be faced with kind of people not listening, right? Or people firing back at you. Right. And so then this is the kind of person who I'll finish the fight. Right. And this will finish the fight in whatever way. A Mercury Aries communicator can be quite immature when they are triggered. And someone with a sun in Aries is someone who does not know how to balance relationships very well. Okay. So he does build his rule structure from the type of relationships that he has, which are, like I mentioned, all very authentic and different depending on who he's talking to. So he'd be kind of a hard person to get a gauge on, right? Like you wouldn't be able to watch him interact with someone else and expect that same interaction back, okay? So there is like one of the problems with this kind of energy, right, is that Moon in Cancer gives like a really deep emotional undertone, okay? And so when you are fiery and you don't like to speak up for yourself, you are someone who kind of sulks a little bit, right? You sulk a little bit until someone pokes you a little bit too hard, and then when they poke you a little bit too hard, you fire out like weeks worth of bullshit that you should have said ages ago. I don't actually think this is the right kind of energy to be dealing with some of the players that play midfield. I don't feel like the communication would be very understood by a lot of those players. And he does have a really good kind of work ethic there, because with that North Node in Cancer, that does mean that he inherently knows how to work hard. And Aries people, especially men, they do know how to work hard, okay? So there is that quality to him. He does like to help people. Like he probably is someone who goes and like bats for somebody else who is like in a fight. He would be someone who would like happily stand behind you while you were having a serious conversation and be ready to end a fight if need be. But, he does he does have a lot of repressed emotions. And again, like the other two, he has this wounding of really not knowing how to deal with, like, am I deserving, right? So am I deserving of am I deserving of the reward of hard work? Now, something I should mention is that this placement that all three of them have had so far, this Chiron in Taurus, the childhood wound of loss and neglect in Taurus, all of that can make them hold on to things they should let go of, right? Jobs. Jobs, for example. It can make them feel like I need to hold on to this because I've got nothing else. All right. So, yeah, I'm not going to rate this one, to be honest. Okay. Who's next? Who we got? Jordan Russell. Okay. Jordan or Russell. Okay. Forward line coach. I mean, I don't like this. You don't like this energy as a forward line coach. Okay. Scorpio is very untrusting. Okay. They're very possessive of things. They communicate, this is this energy of this chart is, I don't really think this mixes very well with many of the people who play in the forward line. Okay. This is someone who is very fiery with their emotional space. Okay. But they are not very good communicators in that space. Okay. This is somebody who really does a lot of work in places of guilt and shame, and likely would use that aspect as a way to try and make people play better. Okay, so again, I don't think that is the type of energy that mixes very well. And when you add this Mars in Aquarius energy, that does something very different to the rest of the energy. Okay, so a Mars in Aquarius, your masculine energy in Aquarius, it causes a lot of confusing shit to go on, right? For yourself, but for the people who are trying to get to know you. Because a Mars in Aquarius is a masculine energy, right? How you motivate yourself, that is constantly rebelling against what it thinks it is. Okay, so when you add the fact that he builds relationships, he communicates, and he shines his creative light through an untrusting, paranoid, secret keeping kind of an energy, and then you add this component where it'd be very hard to know who you're dealing with because he's constantly changing that up, right? The second he thinks he's locked into who he is and how he motivates himself, he changes it. And there is just that makes it really difficult, right? Really difficult to kind of lock into who this person is. And so then you add this way of communicating that can be untrusting, that can be a little bit secretive, that can be a little bit paranoid, that is very good at making people feel guilt and shame. And the kind of energy person that you see coming through here is someone who likes to believe that they're correct, wouldn't be open to hearing other people's sides of the coin, and is very likely to hold on to things, hold on to mistakes that players had made, things that they had done, and like throw it up in their face. I don't rate this at all as somebody who would be in charge of people. And when we look down, we can go that North Node in Aries. So he is here to do something with his masculine energy, right? He is here to sort of start things, okay? But then when we get to the wound placements, which are both in Gemini, so the placement of guilt and shame, Lilith, which is in Gemini, and the placement of childhood wounding, which is also in Gemini, it does mean that very likely, and with all of that Scorpio energy, he has come from quite a traumatic past, right? Both the parental energies seem very fiery, okay, potentially even like strict as fuck and like follow my rules, okay? And so that has kind of really lifted up these childhood wounds, which stop him from being able to understand how to balance relationships, understand the give and take in relationships. And it makes him really nervous about his voice, right? Whether his ideas are willing to be heard, whether they're even worth being heard, whether he needs to talk. And I just don't think that that's a very good mix when you are someone who has to talk to people, right? You already are questioning how you communicate. You already have shame and guilt and the fear of being misunderstood. And then your communication style is like paranoid, secretive. It tries to make people feel bad. And I don't think that that's a mix at all. Sorry, Mr. Jordan Russell. I think you'd be better off working with Ross from St. Kilda. That is more his style. And yeah, this kind of darker energy does not mix well with the overall vibe of the team at Carlton. However, the one thing it does mix well with these Scorpio placements, okay, it does mix well with wanting to invest, okay, with wanting to invest in things. And it does have a huge focus on long-term wealth, okay? So when it comes to being able to talk to a large group of people who are really shaken up when there isn't stability, this is not the one. This is not the one that I would be choosing. Okay, who's next? Who's next? Matthew Cruiser. This was the only photo we could find of him. Carlton don't even have one on his website. Okay, he's a player, so I think this is a really interesting. This is a really interesting one. Like that's literally. Okay, so he joined in 2022, which was an interesting point to be joining. So let's have a look. Okay. Okay, so he has this Taurus energy, right? So there isn't a lot of depth of emotion to this person, okay? A lot of his wound placements are in relation to relationships with people and not being nurtured, okay? And I can tell you right now that childhood wound space that talks about like a wound of nurturing and also that guilt and shame within relationships, that's a direct impact of the mother energy, okay? Mother energy probably a little bit maybe immature, maybe dramatic, and very focused on themselves. Whether or not that's a bad thing, that's not for me to judge. But that's where you do see these wounds of nurturing and fear of, but desire for relationships and this inability to be able to do that. Okay. This is someone who would have a really hard time dealing with any feelings of guilt or shame or fear of being misunderstood, because Taurus energy people have a really hard time with that sort of stuff, right? Because that is Scorpio energy and it is the opposition of his overall energy, okay? So there is a little bit of an ego component when it comes to his emotional space. This is kind of the energy of someone who would stomp their feet and want to be listened to when they want to be listened to, okay? This is not someone that would deal with disrespect and not being listened to very well. And the way they communicate and build relationships and the way that they expand through life can be a little bit sneaky because of that, okay? Now, a Mars in Cancer placement is also very interesting because it is someone who is emotion driven. And so when you look at the rest of the energy of this person and they have, their masculine energy and their childhood wound are the same energy, this can cause a huge problem, okay? Now, this is a very clever communicator, though, Mercury and Gemini, right? Very smart mind, very able to see pieces of the puzzle and put it together. Is this someone who'd be open to your opinions? Unlikely. Unlikely. Is this someone who, once they've locked into what they think is correct, could be swayed? Unlikely, okay? Now, being the ruck coach, when I think of we think of the main people, and we think of TDK and we think of Pito. Now, Pito probably gets along with this person a little bit more than TDK because there would be something within TDK because his overall energy system is that Cancer energy. So there is something within TDK that would trigger this man. Just the way that he does things, okay? Because with the wound placement in the same energy as the person he's dealing with, we're kind of looking at someone who gets very easily triggered through thinking that you are disrespecting him, okay? Now, with that Saturn in Capricorn as well, there was the father energy around him, very strict on following the rules and working very hard. So there is that underlying energy there of like, you need to work hard, okay? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but this is someone who is driven by emotion, but unless they've done the work to understand that, they are driven by repressed emotion. And again, this is someone who could explode at any moment. And it wouldn't be the sort of explosion that comes from fire, right? Like this is like sneaky shit. This is like, that Gemini energy, right? Seeing two sides of somebody. This is somebody who communicates that way. So again, there's a level of that Taurus sun stability that is good for the overall team space. But somebody who is emotionally driven and can be very emotionally triggered into communicating quite manipulative, I don't really trust that energy. I just don't really trust that energy long term when it comes to being able to deal with people, because there's a little bit of like a grudge holding energy to it as well. So yeah, look, I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence with you, Matthew. I'm on the fence. Okay. Who's next? Who we got next? Okay, Brad. Brad. Okay, Brad, I mean, in the same kind of way of what we were just looking at with Matthew, okay, this is someone who does have a lot of repressed emotions. Okay, this is air, like this Aries energy is fire, communicates through fire, all right, is very direct with how they communicate. Probably there's a little bit of a fun kind of aspect to that communication if you're on the right side of them, okay? Someone who probably always kind of joking around if you're on the right side of them. But then when we look at the Venus Mars situation in Aquarius, right? So the feminine energy, the emotional nature, how we build relationships, and the masculine energy, that Mars component of how we motivate ourselves, how we deal with anger, both in Aquarius, okay? Again, this is it's a bit of a strange vibe that you would get from this person, right? Because there's that Aries directness, but then there is this, every time I figured out the sort of man I am, I'm going to rebel against it. Every time I am building a relationship with someone, it's just for us, right? I might have a relationship with 5 different people and they're all very different. So there is that component that can be really hard to kind of figure out what sort of a person this is. And this is somebody who can have quite a one-track mind, okay, with that Aries Mercury. Very one-track mind, very much, kind of would struggle. And it's not that they wouldn't want to, but they, Aries Sun people have an inability to balance relationships, right? And when it's in men, it tends to come through a lot more aggressively, and they tend to want to do things their way all the time, right? Like my personal goal is now the collective vision. And the same, having the mind and the ego working in the same space doesn't really leave you open to other people's opinions. So even though there is that Aquarius component where the motivation and the relationship building is constantly rebelling and wanting to change and evolve, those things, they don't really work that well together, in my opinion, in my experience with this sort of energy. And because he needs to feel kind of safe and nurtured to take risks and grow, again, I just don't think a Mercury Aries is the right energy to be the head of development. I think you need someone who's got a lot more air in that space, a lot more ability to think outside the box. A Mercury Aries doesn't really have that. Now, this could be someone who, in the way of development, could be someone who has a really good eye for how to change up motivating people, okay? But yeah, spotting talent, I'm not sure of. Development, I can see because of that Mars Aquarius. But again, this growth and taking risks factor that comes through emotion, right? And that's the childhood wound. And that's the wound of the mother, right? The wound of nurturing. So the nurturing component to this person is either going to make them quite immature with dealing with relationships and taking risks and growth, or it's going to make them like a ticking time bomb of feelings. Because when you have these placements that are all quite related to emotional repression and you are made of fire, and especially masculine energy Aries people who really have to work hard to understand how to use their emotional space, it can be quite a problem. This can be someone who sulks, who really holds in emotion until it comes out quite explosively. And that energy coming out through a Mars in Aquarius is cold. And pretty straight to the point. Okay. Now he is being pointed toward what he's here to do right now, right? A North Node in Aquarius. There is a component to him that is very authentic, and there is something that he is here to do that is different, that does change things. That makes me a little bit more interested in like having somebody like this on the Carlton board, because there's a particular energy to a North Node in Aquarius that could be helpful, but it does take overcoming a lot of those trauma spaces. And Lilith in Scorpio is a very traumatic space running through the women in the family, which, then of course answers to that Venus in Aquarius. I build relationships really authentically. I've been made to feel weird about the type of man that I am most of my life. Like, it really gives a lot of self-questioning and a lot of emotional repression. So yeah, I just don't know how that goes with development and talent manager. Like development, I can kind of see maybe, but talent, I just don't know if that's an open mind enough to be able to do it, right? So head of development coach, yes, but if he has to oversee like development and talent, I don't know. I don't know. I think you need to be, I think if you are the head of development coach, I think you want to see a lot more air energy in the mind space. Okay. Mercury in Aries, Aries rules the head. So there is a lot of thinking in that component. But like I said, this is the energy system. Aries is quite intuitive in the gut space, right? But you need to be able to overcome all of these emotional woundings to be able to access that energy properly. And I've experienced a lot of charts very similar to this kind of Aries, water energy, traumatic situations with the emotion. And it's very difficult for them to be able to overcome it. So, Brad, development coach, I'm on board with, but if you have to oversee any sort of talent situation, I don't think you're the one, mate. All right, then we're going to move on to Tom. He's the last one whose birthday I could find. So I don't have the development coach, Torrin Baker, or Aaron Greaves, coaching and performance manager. I don't have their birthdays. So feel free to find them and hit me up and we can do a part 2 to this. But let's look at Tom. And I can already see where I'm going to be saying no. Now, one of the issues that we are currently having or had or are in the transition of getting out of at the Carlton Football Club is people being too stubborn and unwilling to change their opinions. And that is this man. That is this man right here. So in the same way that I was kind of saying, Brad, the development coach, I like your eye, but, as talent goes, you're not very open. Well, having said that, I probably put Brad in this role before I'd put Tom based on his energy, okay? They're very stubborn, very close-minded, thinks his way, communicates very directly, thinks that he's right, builds relationships from a point of view of needing to be the biggest light that shines. Make sure you tell me I'm great. Thank you so much. Okay, gets very obsessive about his own stuff, right? Whatever he want to lock into, however he motivates himself, there's an obsessive energy to that. Likely someone who has a lot of habits that make him feel good on the outside. Okay. Very obsessive about those sorts of things. Experience the mother energies growing up as somebody very fiery, very direct, a lot of trauma running through the father line, right? Then he has these very interesting energies in the Node, the Lilith, and the Chiron, right? So the childhood wound Chiron in Gemini. Again, it's that I don't know about my voice, ideas, thoughts, feelings needing to be heard. Wasn't shown that as a child, probably coming from a childhood again. Another level of trauma in the childhood. Lilith in Pisces, that's, comes from the mother wound, places you've been made to feel guilt and shame, which are about emotions, which are about trauma. This is somebody who holds a lot of trauma energy within their whole body, right? Like has experienced trauma, is from placements of trauma. And it's a wound of faith in a way, right? Like it's this constant having to overcome some kind of situation, because when you have this generational line of trauma, you're constantly facing that in the everyday, because we are always trying to, grow and evolve as people. So a North Node in Gemini, there is something about his voice that he is here to be heard for. And he is in kind of a boss energy, right? But whether or not he's the right person to see talent, whether or not he's the right person to develop talent, I don't think so. I don't think that's your strength, Tom. And if I was going to tell you what your strength was, there is something about the way that you communicate with people that makes them feel stable, right? That makes them feel like they can do the hard work, right? And so that does give you the development manager as well, right? Because even though I don't think you are someone who can see what needs to be developed, see like an internal gift that people have, I don't think you have the eye for that. But I do think if somebody told you, like, this person has this skill and I think we need to work on these things, you would be able to make them believe that they could do it if you've worked on your wounding of trusting your voice, okay? They're very distrustful towards people as well, very holds grudges as well. And this is not someone who you would want to hold a grudge with, right? This is somebody who would absolutely ream you out if he felt you had disrespected him. Okay. So yeah, talent wise, like this is where the talent part of your job, Tom, falls down. Taurus people, okay, Taurus energy is external. Okay. Like when we look at that axis, right? Taurus is the external and Scorpio is the internal, right? Now, the way that you see people, the way that you communicate with people, the way that you build relationships is up here, right? So spotting talent, I'm going to say not your strong point, because where you're looking is external. So this is what makes you kind of perfect for the overall Carlton energy, because they, in the past, let's go in the past, because let's manifest the change happening. But in the past, talent has had to look the part, right? And we can see that with some of the people that Carlton have brought on board. We can see how they use them to make money. We can see how they put them out in front of the camera. We can see how they've been very strict with how they show up, okay? This is someone very good at spotting the people that look the part. Whether he can understand internally that they actually have something that can be developed, I would question, okay? Because also with a North Node in Gemini and a South Node in Sagittarius, there is a righteousness, but also like a distrust in themselves that they have to clear up and get over. Okay. So like an ancestral given challenge of not being arrogant with what you think you know. Okay. So again, not somebody open to opinion, not somebody who would change their mind very easily. And for that, I'm going to say you're not the guy, Tom. You're not the guy, because as we move into this new space with the Carlton Football Club that hopefully Graham Wright is taking the reins of and teaching people how to think outside the box, you, my friend, will struggle very hard with thinking outside the box. And as the talent manager, as the person who is there to notice the talent and develop them, I don't think you're that open to opinion when it comes to that. And yeah, I don't think you would be the right one. Okay. So that's my take on these assistant coaches, and I'm sure that they can find their perfect spots at other clubs, but some of these people are just not in the correct energy. They are not the sort of people that we really want moving forward. So I really hope that some change is made there. And yeah, if anyone wants me to get me the birthdays of the other ones, please do, and I will do a part 2 to this video. So let's see what the next changes are. As always, go Blues. If you got a problem, you can meet me at the stage.